A poor girl with a baby hides from the rain in a luxury car. But when the young billionaire finds her, she pleads, "Please let me stay just a little while. My baby brother is sick." And when he looks at the child, his eyes fill with tears. The rain just would not stop. Big, heavy droplets pounded the dark asphalt of the parking lot as Drew adjusted his coat collar, trying in vain to shield himself from the water. It was almost 9 at night, and the corporate office building, where he worked, was practically deserted. Only a few lights remained on in the top floors, people like him, who had forgotten how to go home before the sky turned dark. Drew sighed, staring at the downpour through the glass doors. His car was parked only about 100 feet away, but at that moment it seemed miles off. He considered waiting for the rain to let up, but something told him it would be a long wait, like so many others in his life. At least the loneliness is more comfortable at home, he thought, clutching his briefcase against his chest and running into the rain. The water soaked through his clothes almost instantly. His prized Italian shoes splashed into puddles as he awkwardly hurried toward the vehicle. His hands trembled from the cold when he finally pressed the alarm button. The car's lights flashed twice, like a welcoming beacon in that damp, dark night. He opened the door and tossed the briefcase onto the passenger seat before climbing in. For a moment he felt relief from escaping the rain. Then the reflection in the rearview mirror made his heart skip a beat. 2 eyes were watching him from the back seat. Drew froze, hand still on the door handle. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to process what he was seeing. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. That was when he saw them. A little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with dark hair clinging to her forehead from the dampness, was holding a bundle of blankets close to her chest. Her wide eyes reflected the same fear Drew felt, but there was something else there. Determination. "Please," she whispered, clutching the bundle tighter. "Don't yell." Drew opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He then realized the bundle was moving. A baby. The girl was protecting a baby. How did you get into my car?" he finally managed to say, still struggling to believe what he was seeing. "The door wasn't locked," she answered simply, as though that explained everything. "My baby brother's sick. He has a fever." Drew looked around, searching for an adult, some sign that this was a prank or a misunderstanding. The parking lot was deserted, only the merciless rain falling harder now. "Where are your parents?" he asked, trying not to sound intimidating, though he himself was scared. The girl pressed her lips together and did not reply. She just shook her head slightly, in a gesture that to Drew seemed far older than her fragile appearance suggested. "Look," he went on, you can't go around getting into people's cars like this. I need to call the police." "Or just a little while," she interrupted, her voice wavering for the first time. "Let me stay just a little while, until the rain stops and he gets better. Please." The baby stirred in the blanket and began to cry softly. It was a fragile sound, almost drowned out by the rain. The girl immediately began rocking him with a technique that seemed to have been practiced hundreds of times. "Shh, Toby. It's okay. Shh." Drew felt something strange in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sensation he couldn't quite name. There, in the back seat of his perfectly maintained German car, was something that did not fit into his orderly, predictable world. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised at how gentle his own voice sounded. "Sarah," she answered, without taking her eyes off her brother. "And he's Toby." Drew checked his watch. It was 9:07 p.m., a typical Tuesday night that suddenly had nothing typical about it. The rain now pounded hard on the car's roof, creating a wall of sound between that moment and the rest of the world. "Sarah," he said her name slowly, as though testing how it sounded. "I can't just take you with me. It would be kidnapping, you understand? I have to call the authorities." She looked up then. There was something in that gaze, not just fear or pleading. It was a deep understanding of how the world works, the kind no child should have. "If you call them, they'll separate us," she said softly. "They tried before. I promised my mom I'd always take care of Toby." It was the mention of the mother that broke something inside Drew. That word, mom, caused a fracture in the defenses he had so carefully built over the years. The baby coughed, a worrying sound that echoed in the car's enclosed space. Drew knew what he was supposed to do. There were procedures for situations like this, numbers to call, agencies to contact. The right path was clear and obvious. But as he looked at those two children in the back seat of his car, something stronger spoke within him. "You said he has a fever." Sarah nodded, relieved that he was listening. "How long has it been?" "Since yesterday," she replied, pulling back the blanket a bit to show the baby's face. "I gave him the medicine I had, but it's all gone now, and it's raining too much." Drew glanced again at the empty parking lot. The rain gave no sign of letting up anytime soon. He turned to the steering wheel, placed his hands on it, and stayed like that for a few seconds, feeling his heart pound as an internal battle raged within him. "Just for tonight," he said at last, without turning around. "I'll take you both to my place. Give the baby a warm bath, and first thing tomorrow we'll figure this out." He started the engine and adjusted the rearview mirror. Sarah's eyes met his through the mirror, and she simply nodded, not smiling, almost as if a quiet agreement had been forged at that moment. Drew drove out of the lot cautiously, slower than usual. At every stoplight, he glanced at the mirror to confirm it was all real, that two children were indeed in the back seat of his car. The city glistened under the nightlights, drenched by rain. People hurried along the sidewalks, trying to shield themselves as best they could from the storm. The world carried on normally, unaware that inside that particular car, something extraordinary was happening. "Where were you before you got into my car?" Drew asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "At the park," Sarah replied simply. "Under the big slide." Drew felt a pang in his chest as he imagined the two children huddled under a playground structure, while rain poured around them. How long had they been there, and before the park? Silence. From the corner of his eye in the mirror, he could see Sarah looking out the window now, avoiding his gaze. "Okay," he said softly. "You don't have to tell me now." They continued the trip in silence. Drew lived in a penthouse on the east side of the city, an upscale modern apartment that rarely welcomed visitors. A place that perfectly reflected the emptiness of his life, impeccable, organized, and cold. When he finally parked in the building's garage, Drew realized the logistical problem he faced. How would he get two children, one a sick baby, upstairs, without arousing suspicion? "Sarah," he said, turning to look at her directly for the first time, "I need your help right now. We'll use the private elevator. If anyone asks, you're my niece, okay? And Toby is your baby brother. You came to visit me. Do you think you can do that?" She nodded seriously. There was no trace of childish playfulness in that gesture, only the solemnity of someone who fully grasped the risks. Drew grabbed his briefcase and got out, quickly opening the back door. Sarah was already ready, holding Toby firmly in her small arms. He hesitated, holding out his hands. Can I carry him? He must be heavy for you." To his surprise, Sarah pulled away, slightly shielding her brother. "I can manage," she said, with a conviction that allowed no argument. Drew didn't insist. He led them to the elevator, typing in the access code with trembling fingers. Once inside the metal cabin, all three remained silent as they ascended to the 28th floor. The baby let out a tiny whimper, and Sarah automatically began to rock him, murmuring soothing words with endless patience. When the elevator doors opened directly into the apartment's foyer, Drew couldn't help noticing how Sarah scanned everything with alert eyes. It wasn't admiration he saw in her gaze, but a practical assessment, like she was mentally mapping the place, spotting exits, safe areas. "Do you live alone?" she asked as he unlocked the door. The question took him by surprise because of its perceptiveness. "Yes," he answered, switching on the lights and revealing the spacious living room. "Just me." The apartment had little personality beyond the expensive furniture and the stunning view of the city. No photos on the walls, no toys forgotten in corners, no sign that anyone besides one solitary man lived there. "Come," Drew said, guiding them to the guest room. "You can stay here." The room had never been used. The king-size bed still had its original sheets creased from packaging. Drew opened the closet and found extra blankets, still in their plastic wrappings. "I'll make something for the baby to eat." What does he eat?" he asked, suddenly aware of how little he knew about children. "He still drinks milk," Sarah explained, carefully placing Toby on the bed. "But he also eats mashed fruit and other soft foods." Drew nodded, absorbing the information. "And you? Are you hungry?" Sarah did not answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on her brother, whose breathing seemed slightly rapid. "He's really hot," she said, touching the baby's forehead with the back of her hand. "He needs medicine." Drew felt a surge of panic. What did he know about fevers in babies, about dosages of children's medication, about anything related to kids for that matter? "I'll call a doctor," he decided, pulling out his phone. "No." Sarah exclaimed, alarmed. "They'll ask questions, want documents, call social services." Drew stopped, phone in hand. She was right. Any doctor would ask questions he couldn't answer. "I have a friend," he said after a moment's thought. "He's a doctor and can be discreet. We can trust him." Sarah seemed to weigh the information, analyzing risks like an adult would. "Is he going to take us away?" "No," Drew assured her, though he had no solid basis for the promise. "He'll just check on Toby, help with the fever." While he dialed Marcus's number, his personal doctor, who usually did house calls for hangovers or exhaustion from long work hours, Drew watched Sarah move efficiently around the baby. She unwrapped the blanket, checked his diaper, adjusted his tiny outfit, all with a skill that was startling for her age. Marcus picked up on the third ring. "Drew? Trouble sleeping again?" "No, it's different this time. I need you to come to my apartment. Bring your pediatric kit." A brief pause on the other end. "Pediatric?" Marcus's voice sounded puzzled. "Drew, are you all right?" "Yes, I'll explain when you get here. It's important, Marcus. And I need you to be discreet." Another silence, longer this time. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Drew hung up and turned his attention back to Sarah and Toby. The baby seemed restless, shifting uncomfortably. "I'll get you something to eat while we wait for the doctor," he said, heading to the kitchen. He opened the fridge and stared at its pitiful contents. Some leftover takeout, a half-finished bottle of wine, a few tomatoes wilting in the vegetable drawer. Nothing suitable for children. He found a carton of long-life milk in the cabinet and some cereal in another. It was the best he could do for now. When he returned to the room, he found Sarah sitting on the bed, holding Toby in her arms. The baby was whimpering softly, and she was humming a simple tune, rocking him gently. "The doctor's on his way," Drew said, placing a bowl of cereal and a glass of milk on the nightstand. "You should eat something." Sarah looked at the food, then at Drew. There was hesitation in her eyes. "Go ahead," he reassured her, interpreting her look. "I'm not going to take Toby away from you." Slowly, Sarah arranged the baby at her side on the bed, positioning him carefully among pillows so he wouldn't roll over. Only then did she pick up the bowl and start to eat. Methodically, spoonful by spoonful, as if rationing each bite. Drew sat down in the armchair in the corner, watching them. He had so many questions he wanted to ask, so many alarm bells going off in his mind. Where were these kids' parents? Why were they alone? How long until he had to do the hard but inevitable thing and contact the authorities? The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. "That must be the doctor," he said, getting up. "I'll be right back." Marcus stood in the foyer with his usual black doctor's bag and an expression of barely disguised curiosity. "Drew," he greeted with a nod as he entered. "So what's going on?" Drew closed the door and took a deep breath. "I've got an unusual situation." He gave the shortest explanation possible. The kids in the car, the sick baby, his decision to bring them home. Marcus regarded him with a mix of disbelief and concern. "You realize what you're doing is technically a crime, right?" Marcus asked quietly. "Even with the best intentions." "I know," Drew replied, running a hand through his hair. "But I couldn't leave them out there in the rain with a sick baby." Marcus nodded, looking understanding. "Let's see our little patient then." In the bedroom, Sarah immediately moved into a protective stance when she saw the stranger. "Walk in." Drew introduced them, trying to reassure her. "Sarah, this is Dr. Marcus. He's going to check on Toby and see why he has a fever." Marcus approached with a kind smile, perhaps the same one he reserved for his youngest patients. "Hi, Sarah. May I take a look at your little brother?" She didn't reply verbally, but shifted slightly, giving him just enough space to examine the baby. Her eyes never left the doctor's hands. The checkup was quick and professional. Marcus took Toby's temperature, checked his ears, throat, lungs. It's an ear infection, he finally diagnosed. Quite common in babies his age. Nothing serious, but he needs antibiotics. He opened his bag and removed a few medication bottles. This one's for the fever, he explained, handing the first to Drew. And this is the antibiotic. The dosages are on the label, but I'll write them down to make it easier. Drew took the meds, feeling the weight of responsibility he was now shouldering. How long until he's better? The fever should subside in the next 24 hours. The antibiotic course is for 10 days. He'll show significant improvement in 2 or 3 days, Marcus said, putting his instruments away. Then he lowered his voice. Drew, you have to think about what comes next. You can't just... I know. Drew cut him off, speaking quietly as well. I'll deal with it. I just need a little time. Marcus glanced at Sarah, who stood alert, listening to every word exchanged between the adults. If you need anything, call me, he said, handing a card to Sarah. My number's here for Toby, okay? She took the card carefully, as though it was something precious. Thank you, she muttered, the first word she had directed at him. After Marcus left, Drew gave Toby his first doses of medication. The baby fussed at the bitter taste, but Sarah managed to soothe him, whispering sweet words that sounded like a secret language between siblings. You two should take a bath and rest, Drew suggested, noticing the children's still damp clothes. I'll find something for you to wear. He improvised with what he had, one of his t-shirts for Sarah, which fit like a long nightgown, and a clean scarf that could serve as a temporary diaper for Toby. It wasn't ideal, but it would work until he could buy proper items. While Sarah bathed Toby in the ensuite bathroom, Drew went to the living room and sat on the couch, trying to process everything that had happened over the past few hours. How had his life changed so drastically in a matter of moments? The apartment, which had always felt too big for one man, now seemed small and inadequate with the presence of 2 children. So many essentials were missing: proper food, clothes, baby supplies, items he had never needed before. He opened his laptop and began making a list. Tomorrow, he'd have to buy all of it. For now, they'd have to improvise. When he returned to the room, he found Sarah and Toby already in bed. The baby seemed to be sleeping more peacefully, and Sarah watched him with that constant vigilance she'd shown from the start. Did the medicine work? Drew asked, approaching. I think so. He feels a little cooler. Drew sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't want to intrude on the small safe space Sarah had created around herself and her brother. Sarah, he began, choosing his words carefully. I know you don't know me, and you have no reason to trust me, but I need to understand better what happened so I can help you. She continued to watch Toby, as though the baby's sleep were the most important thing in the world at that moment. And maybe it was. Our mum said she'd be back, she finally spoke, so softly Drew had to lean closer to hear. It's been 3 days. The weight of those simple words hit Drew like a physical blow. 3 days. 2 children alone for 3 days. Where did she go? To work, Sarah answered, still not looking at him. She always comes back. Always. But this time it took longer. And then Toby got sick. Drew nodded, resisting the urge to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. Something told him physical contact wouldn't be welcome at that moment. And you have no other family? No one else who could take care of you? Sarah finally looked at him. There was a hardness in her eyes that didn't belong to a child. Just the 3 of us. It's always been just us 3. Drew tried not to show how deeply that affected him, how familiar it sounded. I see, he said quietly. Well, for now, you're both safe here. Tomorrow morning I'll go out and buy a few things. Clean clothes, the right food for Toby, whatever else you need. For the first time, he saw something different in Sarah's gaze. It wasn't gratitude or relief. It was distrust. Why? She asked directly. Why are you doing this? The question took him aback with its frankness. Why, indeed? Why hadn't he just called the authorities, as would be normal, logical, legal? I don't know, he admitted honestly. I really don't. That candid answer seemed to matter to Sarah. She nodded slightly as if she'd finally heard something that made sense. Drew stood, walking to the door. I'll leave the hallway light on. If you need anything during the night, my room is the last one down the hall. He left the door slightly ajar. In the hallway, he paused for a moment, taking in the new silence that filled his apartment. It was no longer the silence of solitude, but the silence of people sleeping, of lives happening under the same roof. Before turning in, Drew headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. That was when he noticed a piece of paper on the counter that hadn't been there before. He moved closer and saw it was a drawing done in ballpoint pen on a page torn from the notepad he kept near the phone. In the simple but expressive sketch, there were 3 stick figures, 2 small and 1 tall, holding an umbrella over the smaller ones. Beside them, a female figure with long hair hovered like a ghost, arms stretched toward the children but not touching them. Drew sat on a high stool in the kitchen, holding the drawing with care, as though it might disintegrate at the slightest touch. That single pen stroke revealed more than hours of conversation ever could. It was the story of Sarah and Toby, told in the only way a 5-year-old knew how, through simple lines laden with complex meaning. The mother who had left, but whose arms still reached for her children, and now him, the stranger with the umbrella temporarily shielding them from the storm. Drew folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Tomorrow would be another day with hard decisions to be made. But that night, at least that night, 2 children were sleeping safely under his roof, and for a reason he still did not fully understand, it made his apartment feel, for the first time in years, like a home. 3 days had passed since Drew found Sarah and Toby in his car. 3 days of a completely new routine improvised between bottles, medications, and bedtime stories read from children's books hastily purchased. Toby's fever had subsided as Marcus predicted. The baby now smiled more, made those cheerful sounds typical of children his age. Even Sarah seemed less tense, although her eyes still carried that constant alertness. Drew checked the calendar on his phone as he sipped his coffee. Monday. Inevitable. He had delayed going back to work for 3 days, claiming a severe cold, but he couldn't postpone it any longer. The presentation for the new investors couldn't be rescheduled again. I have to go to the office today, he said to Sarah, who was eating cereal at the kitchen island. The spoon stopped midway between the bowl and her mouth. Are you coming back? She asked bluntly, in that disarming honesty that always caught him off guard. Of course I'm coming back, Drew promised, feeling a pang in his chest at how legitimate that worry was. It's just for the day. I'll be back in the late afternoon. Sarah resumed her meal, but something had changed in her posture, an almost imperceptible tension in her small shoulders. What about us? She asked after a few moments. Drew had thought about this in the dead of night while staring at his bedroom ceiling. He couldn't just leave 2 children alone in his apartment, but he couldn't take them to the office either. And he still wasn't ready to do what exactly? Hand them over to the authorities? The very thought gave him an unnameable anxiety. I hired a nanny, he explained, trying to sound casual. She's experienced in caring for kids. She'll stay with you until I get back. We don't need a nanny, Sarah said, frowning. I know how to take care of Toby. Drew moved closer, sitting on the stool next to her. It was the first time they'd been so physically close. I know you do, Sarah. You take better care of him than many adults would, he said gently. But you're also a child. You deserve to play, draw, do kid things. The nanny will help with the heavier tasks. She still didn't look entirely convinced, but didn't argue further. Instead, she asked, what is she like? The nanny. Her name is Eleanor. She's older, experienced. My secretary recommended her. Drew left out the part about running a full background check on Eleanor Winters, 62, widowed, a former pediatric nurse who now supplemented her retirement by working as a nanny. He also omitted that he'd offered double her usual rate to ensure absolute discretion. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:30 a.m. As agreed, Eleanor was punctual. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she greeted when Drew opened the door. Her voice was calm, almost melodious. I'm Eleanor. Please come in. And you can call me Drew. Eleanor's grey hair was pinned into a practical bun. She had a kindly face, etched with lines suggesting many years of smiles, and watchful eyes that seemed to assess the situation more deeply than Drew had explained over the phone. "The children are in the kitchen," Drew said, leading her into the apartment. "Sarah is 5 and Toby is 8 months. He had an ear infection, but he's better now. He still needs to finish the antibiotic. Dosages are listed on the fridge." As he spoke, Drew realized he sounded like a worried father leaving his kids for the first time. The thought made him pause for a second, unsettled by his own feelings. In the kitchen, Sarah regarded the newcomer with that probing look Drew knew well. Eleanor, for her part, made no immediate move to get closer. She simply smiled and sat a respectful distance away. "Hello, Sarah. I'm Eleanor, and that little guy must be Toby," she said, waving to the baby in the high chair. "He likes mashed banana in the morning," Sarah informed, testing the woman's reaction, "and he can't stay on his back for too long or he might choke." "Thank you for telling me," Eleanor replied earnestly. "You seem to know your brother's preferences very well." Something about this exchange seemed to ease some of Sarah's tension. Drew seized the moment to finish the instructions. "There's food in the fridge, diapers in the bedroom, and my number is on this contact list," he said, handing a paper to Eleanor. "If anything at all happens, call me right away. Anything." "Don't worry, Drew, I'll take good care of them," Eleanor assured him. Drew nodded, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. He paused for a moment, looking back. Sarah watched him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "I'll be back soon," he promised. During the drive to the office, Drew felt strangely torn. Part of him was relieved to return to his familiar routine of predictable challenges, meetings, and conference calls. Another part, however, felt restless, like he was leaving something important behind. The morning dragged on through a series of meetings that normally would have absorbed all his attention. Today, however, his mind wandered. Every few minutes, he checked his phone for any notification, message, anything. "Drew, are you with us?" came Michael's voice, snapping him back to the conference room. "Sorry, can you repeat the question?" Michael frowned, obviously noticing something off in his behavior. "I asked if you approved the new marketing strategy for the third quarter." "Oh, yes. It seems good," Drew answered, knowing his response was too vague. At lunchtime, instead of going out with colleagues as he usually did, Drew stayed in his office. He picked up the phone several times, almost calling home before stopping himself. "They're fine," he told himself. "Eleanor knows what she's doing." As the afternoon wore on, his restlessness grew. He came up with an excuse to leave early, a fictitious doctor's appointment he had forgotten to mention. Traffic seemed particularly slow that afternoon. Drew drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, annoyed at every red light, every stop. When he finally parked in his building's garage, he hurried to the elevator, almost running. Opening his apartment door, he was greeted by a momentary silence, followed by the sound of small footsteps running down the hallway. Sarah appeared, halting when she saw him. Her eyes lit up in a way Drew had never seen before. "You came back," she exclaimed, and before he could reply, she rushed toward him and wrapped her arms around his waist. Drew froze, startled by the sudden gesture. For a second, his arms hung in midair, unsure. Then, slowly, he encircled Sarah's small shoulders in a gentle hug. A surge of emotion hit him so strongly, he almost lost his balance. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had shown such genuine joy at his return. "I promised I would come back, didn't I?" he managed, his voice sounding rougher than usual. Sarah let go and pulled him by the hand. "Come see. We made something for you." She led him to the living room, where Eleanor sat on the rug with Toby. The baby let out a happy squeal when he saw Drew, waving his little arms. It was such a surprisingly domestic scene, as if they had always belonged there. "We had a very productive day," Eleanor remarked, getting to her feet. "Little Toby is completely recovered from his infection, and Sarah has been an excellent helper." Sarah dashed to the coffee table and picked up a sheet of paper. "I drew this for you," she said, holding it out to Drew. He accepted it carefully. It was more detailed than the previous one, a drawing of 3 figures holding hands. A tall one, clearly him, and 2 smaller ones, Sarah and Toby, all smiling, in front of a big house that vaguely resembled his building. Above them, a bright sun occupied the corner of the page. In the other corner, a female figure looked on from a distance, as in the earlier drawing. the absent mother, still present in Sarah's memory. "It's so beautiful," Drew said, feeling a lump in his throat. "It's us," Sarah explained as though it was obvious. "In our house. Our house." The words struck Drew with surprising force. He glanced at the drawing again, then at Sarah, at Toby playing on the rug, and at the apartment that had always felt too large and empty, yet now suddenly felt exactly the right size. Something shifted within him at that moment. A door he had kept firmly closed for years began to open. For the first time in a long while, Drew felt connected to something bigger than his professional ambitions, bigger than his solitary routine. "Thank you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. It was just a drawing by a 5-year-old child, simple lines, basic colors, imperfect proportions. But for Drew, at that moment, it was the most precious thing anyone had ever given him. It was an invitation. A possibility. As Eleanor said her goodbyes, promising to return the next day, Drew realized he no longer wanted this to be temporary. He had no idea what to do next, how to handle the legal implications or practical details. He only knew that for the first time since he found those children, he wasn't counting down the days until everything went back to normal. Because his old normal now seemed far too empty. And he wanted, truly wanted, to stay. By the second week with the children, a sort of natural routine had formed. Drew woke up earlier, prepared breakfast while Sarah helped Toby get dressed. Eleanor arrived at exactly 7:30 and Drew headed to the office, now with photos of the kids on his phone to look at during the day. In the afternoon, he came home earlier. Eager for the moment Sarah would run down the hallway to greet him. Yet as routine settled, a restlessness grew within him. At night, after the children were asleep, Drew would sit in his home office, poring over a folder of all Sarah's drawings. Next to it, an ever-growing list of questions without answers. What would happen when their mother appeared? What would he tell the police when asked why he had kept 2 children in his apartment for 2 weeks without reporting it? How would he explain his sudden bond with them? And the most haunting question, what would happen when he had to let them go? On that Wednesday night, after putting Toby to bed and reading Sarah a story, Drew locked himself in his office and made the call he had been avoiding. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number Marcus had given him. County Social Services, Janet Reeves speaking. Drew took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, my name is Drew Carter. I'm calling about a situation with 2 children. Are they in immediate danger? Do I need to send an emergency team?" The woman's voice grew automatically alert. No, nothing like that," Drew hurried to reply. "They're safe, they're with me." A pause followed. "Could you explain the situation more clearly, sir?" Drew ran a hand over his face, trying to find the right words. "I found 2 kids, a 5-year-old girl and an 8-month-old baby, alone about 2 weeks ago. The girl said their mother went to work and never came back. I couldn't just leave them." "You brought them to your home?" "Yes," he admitted, aware of how it sounded. "The baby was sick, it was raining. I thought it would just be for 1 night, but—" "And at no point did you contact the authorities?" The implied condemnation in her question made Drew shrink back. "I know I should have done so immediately. I know what I did is technically illegal. But they were so scared, and the girl said they'd be separated if they went into the system. I just wanted to help." More silence on the other end, then the sound of typing. "Mr. Carter, you must understand the seriousness of the situation. Legally, you should have notified the authorities right away. Keeping these children in your home without legal permission is considered kidnapping, regardless of your good intentions." Drew swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand, but what do I do now?" "I need to send someone immediately to take custody of the children. This arrangement can't continue another day." "Could it be tomorrow morning?" Drew asked, thinking about how to prepare Sarah and Toby, "so I can explain to them what's going to happen." There was hesitation on the other end. "Very well, I'll be there at 10 a.m. But Mr. Carter, if you're not there with the children, when I arrive I'll have to involve the police, is that clear?" "Yes, perfectly clear," Drew replied, feeling his mouth go dry. "We'll be here." When he ended the call, Drew remained in his chair, staring at the wall. The reality hit him with full force. Tomorrow, the children would be gone. That little world they'd built together, that routine, everything would end. A soft sound at the door made him spin around. Sarah stood in the doorway, clutching the newly bought teddy bear in her arms. Her large eyes met Drew's with a look he'd never seen before. Older, more tired. "Sarah," Drew stood, alarmed. "What are you? Is everything okay? Do you need something?" "You're sending us away," she said. It wasn't a question. The air seemed to leave Drew's lungs. How much had she heard? "Sarah, It's okay," she interrupted in that small but firm voice that didn't match her age. "We knew we wouldn't stay forever." Drew knelt to her level. "That's not what I wanted, Sarah. I really didn't want it this way. But there are rules and I just can't." "When?" she asked straightforwardly. Drew felt something break inside him. "Tomorrow morning," he nearly whispered. Sarah nodded, as if confirming what she already suspected. "I'll pack." "How are things?" she said simply and turned to leave. "Sarah, wait," Drew called, standing up. "You don't have to do it now. We can spend the evening together. Read a story, watch a movie, whatever you want." She paused but didn't turn around. "I don't want any more stories," she said, her voice unnervingly calm for such a small child. "Stories just make us believe in things that aren't true." And with that she left, leaving Drew standing, alone in his office, heart aching at the maturity in her words. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the last few days in his mind. How had he let things get so far? How had he allowed his heart to open so much for two children he knew, from the start, he couldn't keep? Before dawn, he got up and went to the children's room. Toby slept peacefully, unaware of what was about to happen. Sarah, however, was awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, methodically folding the clothes Drew had bought her. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. "I have to finish packing," she replied without looking at him, "so I don't forget anything." Drew entered and sat beside her. "Sarah, I want you to know something. These days with you both have been the best days I've had in a long time." She finally looked at him. In the dark, her eyes seemed larger, brighter. "Then why are you sending us away?" The question was so direct, so honest, that Drew felt stripped of all his adult rationalizations. "Because I'm afraid," he admitted at last. "Afraid I'm not good enough for you, afraid I'll make mistakes, afraid of the consequences of hiding you for so long." "Everyone makes mistakes," Sarah said. "My mum made mistakes too, but she always came back." "I know. I hope she comes back to you soon." "You're not coming back, are you?" she asked. And for the first time, Drew saw tears in her eyes. "I'll try," he said, knowing it was an empty promise. "I'll do what I can to stay in touch." Sarah only nodded, returning to folding her clothes. Drew realized there was nothing more to say. No words could ease what was coming. "Do you want me to help?" he offered. She shook her head. "No. I can do it. I always can." Drew felt the weight of those words. How many times had this child had to be self-sufficient? How many times had she been forced to be strong when she should have just been a child? When morning came, Drew was already in the kitchen making breakfast. Pancakes because Sarah liked them. One last gesture, a desperate attempt to soften the blow he himself was delivering. Sarah appeared soon after, already fully dressed, carrying Toby in her arms and a small backpack on her shoulders. "I made pancakes," Drew said, trying to sound cheerful. "Thank you," Sarah replied politely, sitting down with Toby in his high chair. She ate in silence, helping her brother with small pieces of pancake and wiping his mouth with a neatly folded napkin. Drew watched, memorizing every detail. The way Sarah blew gently on Toby's milk before giving it to him. How she dabbed his mouth with the napkin, the sound of Toby's laugh when something amused him. Details that would soon be mere memories. At 9:45, Drew heard the intercom. A package had arrived at the front desk. He went down to fetch it, leaving the children alone for a few minutes. When he returned, he found Sarah in the living room. She had placed Toby on the rug with some toys, and now sat on the sofa, writing something on a piece of paper. Drew approached quietly, noticing she was drawing. Realizing his presence, Sarah quickly folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. "It's a surprise," she said. "For later." Before he could respond, The doorbell rang. 10 on the dot. Janet Reeves was punctual. Drew took a deep breath. Trying to summon courage. That must be the social worker, he said to Sarah, who was already picking up Toby. The girl nodded solemnly. I know. Drew opened the door. Janet Reeves was a woman in her 50s, with brown hair lightly streaked with grey and determined but kind eyes. She wore a professional blazer and carried a folder of documents. Mr. Carter? She greeted formally. Yes. Please come in, Drew replied, stepping aside. Janet entered, her eyes immediately finding Sarah and Toby in the living room. Hello, she said, crouching to Sarah's level. You must be Sarah. And this handsome little guy is Toby, right? Sarah nodded silently. My name is Janet. I'm a social worker. Do you know what that means? It means you take care of kids who have nowhere else to go, Sarah answered, her voice small but resolute. That's right, Janet confirmed, casting a brief look at Drew before turning back to the girl. I'm going to take you and your baby brother somewhere safe until we can find your mom or another family member. Will we stay together? Sarah asked immediately, fear breaking into her voice. For the first time, Janet hesitated only a fraction of a second before replying. We'll do our best to keep you together, sweetheart. It wasn't a promise, and Drew saw that Sarah noticed. The girl clutched Toby more tightly. Mr. Carter, Janet said, turning to Drew, I'll need you to tell me exactly how you found the children. You'll also need to sign some documents. Drew nodded, accompanying Janet to the kitchen while Sarah stayed with Toby. For the next 20 minutes he recounted everything in detail, the encounter in the car, the 2 weeks together, everything he knew about their circumstances. Janet jotted it all down, occasionally asking additional questions. I understand your concern, Mr. Carter, and your good intentions, she said at last. But you realize the proper procedure would have been to notify the authorities at once, don't you? Yes, Drew admitted. I wasn't thinking clearly. The children appear well cared for, which I'll note as a mitigating factor in my report. But I can't ignore that you kept 2 minors without official oversight for 2 weeks. Drew nodded, accepting the reprimand. What happens to them now? They'll be taken to a temporary shelter while we look for their mother or other relatives. If we can't find anyone, they'll enter the system for adoption or foster care. What if, Drew began, voice faltering. What if I wanted to apply for foster care? Janet studied him for a moment. It would be a long process, Mr. Carter. Background checks, interviews, home assessments. And given the irregular circumstances of how you initially took custody, there would be additional complications. I understand, Drew said, feeling the last thread of hope snap. When they returned to the living room, Sarah was already standing, backpack on, Toby in her arms. A larger bag held the baby's belongings. We're ready, she said. Drew noticed how she avoided looking directly at him. You don't have to carry all that yourself, sweetie, Janet said kindly, extending her arms. I can help with Toby. Sarah hesitated, but finally let Janet take the baby. Toby whimpered for a moment, then settled in her arms. Well, I think that's everything, Janet said, also picking up the bigger bag. Mr. Carter, I'll contact you if we need more information. Drew nodded, unable to speak. A lump filled his throat, a weight in his chest making it hard to breathe. Sarah, he managed at last, kneeling down to her level. Thank you. For everything. For letting me know you and Toby. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she held out the folded piece of paper she had put in her pocket. This is for you, she said softly. So you can look at it later. Drew took it with trembling hands. Thank you. Without warning, Sarah stepped forward and gave him a quick hug. It was brief, almost furtive, but Drew felt as if something inside him shattered. Goodbye, Drew, she whispered, pulling away quickly. Goodbye, Sarah, he replied, rising to look one last time at Toby in Janet's arms. Goodbye, Toby. The baby smiled at him, unaware of what was happening. That innocent smile was almost more than Drew could bear. Janet led the children to the door, Drew following. In the hallway, she turned once more. Again, I appreciate you contacting the authorities, Mr. Carter. It was the right decision, no matter how hard. Drew just nodded, unable to find words. He watched as Janet walked them to the elevator, Sarah walking at her side, small and determined. In the last instant before the doors closed, the girl looked back, her eyes meeting Drew's for one final moment, and then they were gone. Drew closed the apartment door and leaned against it, his legs feeling weak. The silence that engulfed him now wasn't the silence of solitude anymore. It was the silence of absence, of loss. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper Sarah had given him. It was a drawing done in colored markers he'd bought for her. 3 figures, Drew, Sarah, and Toby. But unlike her earlier drawings, this time Drew was shown from behind, walking away from the 2 children. Below, in carefully formed letters, was written, "Thank you for everything, don't worry about us." Drew stood still for several moments, staring at the drawing. A whirlwind of emotions washed over him, and he let himself absorb every line, every color, every heartbreaking word. At last, he folded it carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket near his heart. He looked around the apartment, at the forgotten toys, at Toby's high chair in the kitchen, at Sarah's drawings still stuck to the fridge. There was nothing else to do now but hope somehow the children would find the home they deserved, and live with the knowledge that for 2 brief weeks he almost had the courage to be that home. 3 days had passed since Sarah and Toby left. For Drew, it felt more like 3 years. The first morning after the children were gone, he woke up in a panic, thinking he'd heard Toby crying. In a confused moment, he rushed out of bed before remembering the baby was no longer there. No one was. On the second morning, he lay there staring at the ceiling, avoiding the clock that normally told him it was time to start the routine with the kids. At 7:30, the intercom stayed silent. Eleanor was no longer coming. There was no one to care for. On the third morning, Drew forced himself up at the usual time, determined to reclaim his old routine, the one from before he had found Sarah and Toby that rainy night in his car. He made coffee, got dressed, drove to the office, going through the motions like a machine, body moving without conscious thought. Now, sitting at his desk with a stack of contracts before him, he gazed out the window without really seeing the city. It was the 4th day, the 4th morning waking to an empty apartment, the 4th attempt to pretend everything was back to normal. "Drew, did you hear what I said?" Michael's voice brought him back to reality. His partner stood in the doorway holding a folder, eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Sorry, I was distracted." "What were you saying?" "The meeting with the investors, Drew. It started 10 minutes ago. Everyone's waiting in the conference room." Drew glanced at the clock, 2:10 p.m. The meeting he himself had scheduled and spent weeks preparing for. "Right. Yes, I'm on my way." Michael didn't budge. "Are you okay? You've been acting strange all week." Drew forced a smile, gathering his papers. "I'm fine. Just a little tired." Michael studied him another moment, clearly unconvinced, but nodded and left. Drew took a deep breath, organized his thoughts, and headed to the meeting. For 2 hours, he forced himself to be present, to give the necessary presentations, answer questions. His voice sounded normal, his explanations were clear, his arguments persuasive. Outwardly, he was the same old Drew Carter, efficient and focused. Inwardly, something had changed fundamentally. By 5 o'clock, when he would normally be at peak productivity, Drew was already packing up. In recent days, the idea of staying late at the office had lost all appeal. What once felt like dedication now just felt like an escape. And not even work could distract him from the void waiting for him at home. "Leaving early again?" his assistant asked, trying to hide her surprise. "Yes, I have some things to take care of," he answered vaguely. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, handing him a slip of paper. "The social worker called. She left this number for you to call. Her back." Drew took it, heart pounding. "Janet Reeves, could there be news about the kids? Thank you, Alice. I'll call her right now." He returned to his office and shut the door, dialing the number with trembling fingers. "County Social Services, Janet Reeves speaking." "Janet, it's Drew Carter. I got your message." "Ah, Mr. Carter, thank you for calling back. I reached out to let you know we located a relative of the children." Drew's stomach dropped. A relative who? An aunt on their mother's side who lives in another state. She had no idea her sister had gone missing, but she's agreed to take the children temporarily. How are they?" A short pause before Janet responded. "They're adjusting. Sarah is quite withdrawn, which is to be expected. Toby seems fine." Drew wanted to ask more. Whether Sarah mentioned him, if she asked why he hadn't fought for them, if they told her anything. But no words came. "There's something else," Janet continued. We found a lead on their mother's whereabouts. It appears she might have been hospitalized after an accident. We're looking into it. I see, Drew said, feeling a strange mix of hope for the children and personal emptiness. If their mother was alive, they might soon be reunited. That would be best for them, of course, but it also meant they'd be even further from his life. Thank you for letting me know. You seem to genuinely care about these kids, Janet observed. That's uncommon in most cases I handle. Drew didn't know how to respond. There was a moment of silence before Janet spoke again. Anyway, that was all. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Carter. You too. Drew hung up and stared at the phone. The news should have cheered him up. The children were with family and their mother might be alive. So why did he feel that weight in his chest? He drove home on autopilot, barely registering his route. Opening his apartment door, he was greeted by the silence, once neutral, now deafening in its emptiness. Drew placed his briefcase on the console by the entrance and made his way to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, stared at its contents for a moment, then shut it again without taking anything. On the door, Sarah's drawings had been removed. He had carefully stored them in a folder, but the colorful magnets that had held them up remained like ghosts of an interrupted life. He poured himself a glass of water and walked to the living room, dropping heavily onto the sofa. He turned on the TV just for the noise to fill the silence. He landed on a children's channel, where bright cartoons danced across the screen. Drew froze for a moment, recalling Sarah sitting on this exact sofa, watching that exact show, patiently explaining the storyline to Toby, who was more interested in drooling on his own fingers. He quickly changed the channel, stopping on a news broadcast. More comforting, more adult, more alone. Hours later, Drew woke with a start. He had dozed off on the couch, still in his work clothes. The apartment was dark except for the bluish glow of the TV, now playing some late-night infomercial. He rubbed his eyes, trying to get his bearings. The digital clock on the stereo read 11:47 p.m. Standing up, he stretched his stiff muscles. As he did, his foot bumped something under the couch. He bent down to see what it was. A colored pen. One of those he had bought for Sarah. It must have rolled under there without anyone noticing. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands, remembering how Sarah would grip her pens with such intense concentration. On an impulse, Drew pulled the couch away from the wall a few inches, searching for any other forgotten objects. There were no more pens, but something else caught his eye, a crumpled piece of paper partially hidden. He reached for it, carefully smoothing it out. It was another drawing by Sarah, one he had never seen. It showed a house, clearly his apartment, building with a closed door. Outside stood Sarah and Toby, drawn with sad expressions. Inside, visible through a window, stood Drew, also looking sad. Across the top of the drawing, in big, uneven letters, each filled with a different color, was a single word: family. Drew sank onto the floor, holding the drawing as if it were infinitely fragile. When had Sarah drawn this? After hearing him on the phone with Janet, or maybe on the morning they left while he was cooking breakfast. The drawing perfectly captured how he felt now, separated from the children by a door he himself had helped close, all of them isolated and sad. Yet the word at the top, family, hit Drew like a physical blow. Sarah saw them as a family, not just a temporary arrangement, not just a shelter from the rain, but a real family. Something gave way inside Drew. Some barrier he hadn't realized was still up. Sitting alone on the living room floor with a crumpled drawing from a 5-year-old, he finally let the tears come. Silent sobs shook his shoulders. As the truth struck him full force, he had lost something he hadn't even known he wanted: a family. The apartment's silence surrounded him as the lone witness to his grief. But within that silence, for the first time, a certainty was born. He couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the decisions made, but the future was still unwritten, and Drew no longer wanted to live in that silence. On Friday morning, Drew woke before his alarm. He'd slept little, tossing and turning with thoughts and decisions clashing in his mind. As the first rays of sun broke through the window, he was already up. He had made the decision in the middle of the night. He couldn't go on like this, caught between two worlds, the old one which no longer served him, and the new one which he had lost before fully understanding it. He needed to take the first step. He took a quick shower and dressed carefully, choosing casual clothes instead of his usual suit. While making a simple breakfast, his eyes fell on the folder holding Sarah's drawings. He opened it and took out the last one she had given him, the one showing him walking away. Late the previous night, he'd bought a simple but elegant frame. He placed the drawing inside, adjusting it meticulously. It was both a gift and a promise, a beginning. He called the office and informed them he wouldn't be in that day. His assistant, Alice, was surprised. Drew Carter never took days off, but she asked no questions. By 9 o'clock he was in his car, the framed drawing on the passenger seat wrapped in protective paper. He had the address on a slip of paper, though he'd already memorized it from his conversation with Janet Reeves. The children's shelter was about a half-hour drive from downtown in a quiet residential area. It was an older building but well-maintained, painted in pastel tones, with a small front yard where some kids were playing under adult supervision. Drew parked and sat there for a few minutes watching. His heart raced, his palms felt damp. What would he say? How would he be received? Was Sarah still there, or had she already been transferred to her aunt's in another state? Finally, he gathered his courage and got out of the car, taking the wrapped parcel with him. He walked to the main entrance where a receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Good morning. May I help you?" "Good morning, I'm Drew Carter. I'd like to speak with Janet Reeves if possible." The woman checked a computer. "Ms. Reeves is in a meeting at the moment. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's about Sarah and Toby, the children who arrived a few weeks ago." Something in his tone or in the mention of the names made the receptionist scrutinize him more closely. "One moment, please." She made a quick phone call, speaking in hushed tones. Drew waited, holding the parcel as though it were priceless. "Mr. Carter, Miss Reeves can see you in a few minutes. Please wait in the lobby." Drew nodded and went to a small waiting room. He sat in a chair, the package in his lap. The walls were adorned with children's drawings. A low shelf held books and toys, so the place tried to be welcoming, but an institutional feel still hung in the air. 10 minutes later, Janet Reeves appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Carter," she greeted him with a neutral expression. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Good morning, Janet. I'm sorry for dropping by without notice." She gestured for him to follow her to a small meeting room. "What can I do for you?" she asked once they were seated. Drew set the parcel on the table. "I wanted to know how Sarah and Toby are doing. And I brought them something." Janet observed him for a moment before answering. "Toby is adapting well. He's a resilient baby, like most that age. As for Sarah..." Janet hesitated slightly. "It's been tougher. She's very quiet, talks little, doesn't really interact with the other children." Drew felt a pang in his chest. "She's still here. I thought maybe she'd already gone to her aunt's." "There were some complications with the paperwork. The transfer's been postponed for at least another week." "And their mother, any news?" Janet sighed. "We've confirmed there was an accident. She's in a hospital in another state, unconscious. The doctors don't know when or if she'll recover." The news hit Drew hard. For all the complications, he had never wanted anything this awful for their mother. "I'm very sorry to hear that. These are difficult cases," Janet replied. "Now, about your visit..." "I'd like to see Sarah," Drew said plainly, "just to see how she's doing so she'll know I haven't forgotten her." Janet studied him with her keen professional eyes. "Mr. Carter, I must be frank. I mentioned your name to Sarah a few days ago, asked if she'd like a visitor. She said no." The words felt like a punch in the stomach. Drew looked away, trying to hide how it hurt him. "I see. Children like Sarah develop coping mechanisms. Emotional withdrawal is one of them. It's nothing personal against you." Drew nodded, not trusting his voice to speak. After a moment, he gently slid the package toward Janet. "I still want her to have this. It's the drawing she gave me before leaving. I framed it." Janet took the package. "I'll make sure she gets it." Drew pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "And this too, please. It's just a note." Janet accepted the envelope, looking at Drew with an expression that now held a trace of compassion. "You know, Mr. Carter, in all my years of social work, I've rarely seen anyone so affected by such a brief encounter with children who aren't theirs. Drew didn't know what to say. How to explain that those 2 weeks had changed something fundamental inside him. How to put into words the connection he felt, the emptiness he now carried. "May I ask what you wrote?" Janet asked, indicating the envelope. "Just that I'm here, that if she wants to see me, I'll come every day." Janet frowned slightly. "Mr. Carter? I won't force her," Drew clarified quickly. "I won't insist on seeing her against her will. I'll just sit in the garden outside on the bench. If she wants me, she'll know where to find me. If she doesn't, I'll respect that." Janet seemed to weigh the situation. "All right, I'll give her your gift and your note. As for waiting in the garden, our outdoor space is partly public. I can't stop you from sitting there as long as you respect the rules and the privacy of the other children." "Thank you," Drew said, standing. "That's all I ask." That afternoon, Drew sat on a bench in the shelter's small garden. From there, he could see children of various ages playing, but Sarah wasn't among them. He made no move to enter the building or approach any staff. He just sat, waiting. After 2 hours, he got up and left. He would come back the next day, and he did. On Saturday morning, Drew was on the same bench again. He brought a book to pass the time, but couldn't focus on the words. His eyes kept scanning the playground for that little figure he knew so. Well, Sarah didn't show up. On Sunday, he returned again. This time, he brought a small coloring book and crayons, leaving them with the receptionist for Sarah. No note, no demands. Just the gift and his steady presence on the bench. Monday, he asked for another day off from work. Tuesday as well. Wednesday, he worked in the morning and came to the shelter in the afternoon. Thursday and Friday were the same. Over the weekend, he spent entire days on that bench. A week went by. Then another. Drew kept showing up, always with small gifts, a teddy bear reminiscent of the one Sarah had left behind, a letter sharing mundane details of his day, a small music box. Some of the shelter staff began to recognize him, waving from a distance. The children playing in the garden sometimes watched him curiously. One or two approached, asking what he was doing there. "Waiting for a friend," he'd answer with a gentle smile. On the 10th day, Janet Reeves came to the bench where he was seated. "She asked about you today," Janet said without preamble. Drew's heart leapt. "What did she say?" "She asked if you were still coming. She said she saw you from the window." "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that you've been here every day, leaving presents for her." Drew nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Mr. Carter," Janet continued in a softer tone than usual, "I can't promise anything. Sarah's been through a lot in her short life. Trust doesn't come easily to her." "I understand," Drew said. "I'm in no rush." Janet nodded and walked away, leaving him alone on the bench again. On the 14th day, Drew arrived a bit later than usual. He'd had an important meeting he couldn't postpone. By the time he got to the shelter, it was already past 4 in the afternoon. He made his way to his usual bench, carrying a small bag. Inside was a new sketchbook and colorful markers. He was so focused on organizing the gift that he didn't notice the small figure standing a few yards away, watching him. When he finally looked up, his heart seemed to stop. Sarah was there, staring at him. Time froze as their eyes met. Sarah remained motionless, her fingers gripping the hem of her blue t-shirt. She looked thinner, Drew noted, or perhaps the shirt was just too big for her. Her hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, different from the more elaborate braids Eleanor used to style for her. More than her physical appearance, it was her expression that had changed, more guarded, more closed off. Those 15 days seemed to have built new walls around her. Drew didn't move. He didn't want to scare her away now that she was finally here. He simply sat there, the gift in his hands, waiting. Sarah broke the silence first. "Why did you come?" she asked, her voice small but firm. The question, so direct, so fundamental, caught Drew off guard. He had rehearsed so many explanations for when he finally saw her again, but now they all felt hollow compared to the simplicity of that question. He took a deep breath and answered with the only truth that mattered. "Because I realized you two are my family." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with a significance neither had previously dared to name. Sarah didn't react immediately. Her eyes studied Drew's face, as if searching for any sign of falsehood. You didn't want us before, she finally said, not accusing him, just stating a fact. Drew felt the weight of those words. He set the gift bag aside on the bench and slowly knelt on the grass, bringing himself down to her eye level. Sarah, I need to apologize, he said, his voice shaky with contained emotion. For letting you go, for not understanding what you meant to me sooner. I made a mistake, and I'm here now because I want to do right. Sarah kept staring at him without answering, but she didn't run. She was listening. For Drew, that was enough of a start. You said you would try, she spoke after a long pause. But you didn't try. You called her and you didn't fight for us. Her accusation was fair, and Drew didn't attempt to defend himself. You're right. I should have fought harder. I should have said no when the social worker came to take you away. I should have done everything differently. You lied, Sarah went on, her voice gaining a little volume. You said we could stay, that everything would work out. Drew felt each word like a small blade cutting through the defenses he'd built up over years. Yes, I lied. Not on purpose, but I did. I thought I was doing the right thing, following the rules. But I was wrong. A small crease formed between Sarah's eyebrows. Grown-ups always follow the rules, she said, surprisingly bitter for someone so young, even when they're dumb. Sometimes rules are important, Drew replied softly, but sometimes what matters most are the people, and I chose the rules over you. That was my greatest mistake. Sarah looked away for the first time, gazing at the ground. It doesn't matter now. We're leaving next week to go live with my aunt. Drew felt that same pang in his chest. Janet had mentioned the impending transfer, but hearing it from Sarah made it more real, more painful. Is it far? He asked. Another state, Sarah replied. I'll have to go to a new school, everything different again. There was a resignation in her voice that didn't fit a 5-year-old. A resignation that instability was normal. Sarah, Drew said, carefully choosing his words, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but if you could give me another chance, a chance to show you I can be different, that I can be better. How? She challenged. Are you going to fight the social worker? Tell my aunt we can't go? If I have to, yes, Drew replied, surprising even himself with his determination. I'll do whatever it takes, the legal way this time, the right way, but I'll fight for you. Sarah studied him for a long moment before speaking. I don't believe in promises anymore. Her words struck Drew like a physical blow. How could a child so young have already lost something as fundamental as believing in promises? I understand, he said quietly. Then I won't promise, I'll show you. Every day, until you leave, I'll be here. And if you do leave, I'll find out where you are and keep trying. Not because I promised, but because it's what I want to do. A slight quiver passed over Sarah's lower lip. For a moment it seemed like she might cry, but she quickly regained control. How's it going to be? She asked, a new vulnerability in her tone. If we come back? Drew felt a spark of hope at that question. Honestly, I don't know exactly. I know I'll have to make changes. Learn a lot. Make mistakes, probably. But we'll figure it out together. What if my mom comes back? The question hung between them, laden with significance. Drew knew from Janet that her mother's condition was uncertain, but Sarah clearly lacked the full picture. Then, we'll be really happy she returned, he said honestly. Your mom will always be your mom, Sarah. Nothing will change that. But what about you? I'll still be here. One way or another, I'll still be part of your life if you'll let me. Sarah seemed to consider his words, her gaze drifting to the bench where Drew had spent the last 2 weeks waiting. Why didn't you give up? She asked. Nobody stays that long. Her question went right to the heart of everything. Drew could have offered many explanations about commitment, responsibility, redemption. But only one truth mattered. Because when you left, I realized my life without you didn't make sense anymore. That apartment wasn't a home without Toby's laughter, without your drawings on the fridge, without you running to greet me after work. Sarah took a small step closer, lessening the distance between them. Did you really miss us? More than I've ever missed anything or anyone in my life, Drew replied, and it was the pure truth. Silence settled between them, no longer tense, but filled with possibility. Sarah looked past Drew toward the shelter building. I have to go back inside now. It's almost snack time. Drew nodded, trying not to let disappointment show. He wanted more time, more words, more chances to rebuild what he'd broken. I understand. May I come back tomorrow? Sarah hesitated. A moment. Toby misses you, she finally said. He can't really talk yet, but sometimes he looks at the door like he's waiting. Drew felt a lump in his throat. I miss him too. Sarah took another small step forward. She was now close enough that Drew could see the freckles on her nose, the wisps of hair escaping her ponytail. If you come tomorrow, maybe I'll bring him to see you, just for a bit. Drew felt as though he'd just been given the most precious gift in the world. I'd love that, Sarah. Truly. She nodded, still not smiling, but her gaze had softened almost imperceptibly. It's not a promise, she warned. Just a maybe. A maybe is all I need, Drew replied. Sarah turned to go, but paused after a few steps. The picture you gave me, the one I gave you before leaving, you put it in a nice frame. It's one of my greatest treasures, Drew said simply. She seemed to think about that for a moment. Thanks for the gifts, and for waiting, and then she was gone. Quickly walking back into the building, her steps small but determined. Drew remained kneeling on the grass long after she disappeared inside. No guarantees, no promises. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with legal, emotional and practical hurdles. But for the first time in 15 days, indeed in all his adult life, Drew felt certain he was on the right path. A path he hadn't chosen, but that had chosen him. A path that began on that rainy night and led him here, kneeling on the grass of a children's shelter yard, his heart filled with a hope he had never known. The encounter lasted only a few minutes. Simple words exchanged between a man and a child. Nothing had been promised, nothing was guaranteed. But to Drew, it was everything. It was the beginning. The day after that meeting, Drew arrived at the shelter earlier than usual. He brought a small basket of fresh fruit and 2 carefully chosen children's books. He sat on the same bench, trying to tamp down the anxiety in his chest. Would Sarah come? Would she bring Toby as she'd hinted? Morning passed slowly. The children came out to play as usual, but Sarah was not among them. Drew tried not to let disappointment show. After all, she had only said, maybe. It wasn't a promise. It was nearly lunchtime when he finally saw her. Sarah stood by the building's door, half hidden, watching him from a distance. She didn't approach or wave. She just observed him. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small smile. After a few minutes, she disappeared inside again. On the 3rd day, she appeared once more. This time, she stood closer, leaning against a tree about 30 feet from the bench. Drew waved discreetly. She did not wave back, but also didn't move away. I brought some apples, Drew said loudly, trying to sound casual. Those little red ones you liked. Sarah didn't respond, but she did glance at the basket for a moment before looking back at him. I also have a new book. It's about a girl who finds a dragon in her backyard. I thought you might like it. No verbal response, but Drew noticed she took a tiny step forward. You don't have to come over if you don't want to, he continued. I can leave it at reception like the other gifts. Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the building and then back to Drew. Can I just look at it up close? She asked finally, her voice almost too quiet to hear across the distance. Of course, Drew answered, fighting the surge of emotion he felt at hearing her voice. She approached slowly, each step deliberate, as though testing the ground beneath her feet. When she reached a safe distance, she stopped. Drew didn't try to close that gap. Instead, he placed the book on the bench beside him, along with a shiny red apple. I'll be here again tomorrow, he said gently. Same time. Sarah quickly snatched up the book and apple, then backed away a few steps. Toby's sleeping, she said, as if apologizing for not bringing him. He takes a nap after lunch. That's all right. Maybe another day. She nodded, then turned and hurried back into the building, book and untouched apple in her arms. The following days followed a similar pattern. Each time Sarah appeared, staying a bit longer, getting a bit closer. On the 6th day, she sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a considerable space between them. On the 7th, she ate one of the pears Drew had brought, waiting until he took a bite of his first. On the 8th day, she brought Toby. Drew's heart nearly stopped when he saw her emerge from the building with the baby in her arms. He had grown a little in those days. His face looked rounder, and he had more hair, soft golden curls like a little halo. "He was asking about you," Sarah said as she drew near, though they both knew Toby could barely say a few words. It was her way of saying she was ready for this step. "Hi, buddy," Drew greeted gently, staying seated on the bench to avoid startling them. "You've gotten big." Toby eyed him curiously, then broke into a sudden smile. A wide grin of recognition that made something in Drew's chest both break and mend at once. "He remembers you," Sarah noted, sounding almost surprised. "I've never forgotten him," Drew said simply. "Or you." On the 10th day, Sarah sat beside Drew on the bench and let him hold Toby. The baby cooed happily, tugging on Drew's tie with his small, inquisitive hands. "You still come every day," Sarah remarked, watching. "Them, I said I would, even when it rained." "Even when it rained," Drew confirmed. "I just waited under that covered awning over there." "Why?" she asked again, though this time it didn't sound accusatory, but genuinely curious. "Because you two matter to me, more than anything else." Sarah was silent for a moment, watching Toby settle so naturally in Drew's arms as though he had never left. "Have you talked to the social worker about us not going to my aunt's?" "I have," Drew said. "In fact, I've talked to a lot of people, lawyers too. I'm trying to get custody of you both." Her eyes widened slightly. "Is it hard?" "Yes," he admitted. "Important things usually are. It's worth trying anyway." On the 12th day, Sarah was already on the bench when Drew arrived, though Toby wasn't with her. "He's got a little cold," she explained. "Nothing serious." Drew nodded, imagining how it would feel to be there, comforting him, checking his temperature, making sure he was well cared for. Sarah held out a folded paper to him. "I drew this last night." Drew opened it carefully. It was more detailed than her previous drawings. 3 figures holding hands, Drew, Sarah, and Toby, in front of a building that resembled his apartment. A bright sun shone in the corner, and each figure had a big smile. Across the bottom, in large, colorful letters, she had written, "If you really stay, maybe we can try." Drew felt a lump in his throat. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me," he said, voice thick with emotion. Sarah watched him for a moment before asking, "Are you really going to stay?" "I am," Drew promised. "As long as it takes, as long as you both want me to." In the following weeks, the legal process began to take shape. Drew formally applied for temporary custody, a first step on a long road. Surprisingly, Janet Reeves became an ally. Her report highlighted the bond she observed between Drew and the children, the dedication he'd shown, the visible improvement in Sarah's behavior since their regular meetings began. "It'll be a long process," she warned during a meeting in her office. "We'll have interviews, psychological evaluations, home visits, and there's still the matter of the children's mother." "I understand," Drew said. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." The first formal interview was conducted by a psychologist specialized in children under state custody. Elaine Goodman was middle-aged with kind but sharp eyes, watching every interaction between Drew and the kids with professional focus. "What if it doesn't work out?" she asked Drew candidly, while Sarah colored at a nearby table. "What? If you find raising 2 children is harder than you imagine?" "It will be hard," Drew replied honestly. "There will be good days and bad days, moments of doubt and frustration, but I'll be there for all of them." Sarah, who seemed not to be paying attention, suddenly lifted her head. "What if I break something?" she asked in her small but clear voice. "What if I do something wrong? What if I wake up crying at night and bother you?" Drew looked at her, understanding the real fear behind the question. "We'll fix it together," he answered simply. "If something breaks, we'll mend it. If you do something wrong, we'll talk about it and learn from it. If you wake up crying, I'll be there to hold you." Elaine took note, clearly moved by the exchange. Supervised visits soon turned into short outings to the park, the zoo, a children's bookstore. Drew rediscovered the city through Sarah's eyes, noticing details he'd never seen. Ducks in a pond, the shapes of clouds, the texture of gravel underfoot. His apartment was also transforming. One room was painted a soft green with forest-themed wall decals. A child-sized bed replaced the old guest bed for Sarah. Toby's crib, now permanent, occupied the corner near the window. Low bookshelves were filled with children's books, educational toys organized in colorful bins. On one home visit, Janet looked around, seemingly satisfied with the changes. "You really are committed to this," she noted, checking the child-proofed outlets and rounded furniture corners. "Completely," Drew confirmed. It was during this visit that a moment occurred that would change everything. Sarah, exploring her newly decorated room, suddenly stopped and looked at Janet and Drew talking in the living room. "If I stay with him," she asked in her small, clear voice, "can I keep my mom's last name?" The living room went silent. Janet glanced at Drew, whose face registered initial surprise followed by deep understanding. Drew approached and knelt to Sarah's level. "Of course you can, Sarah," he said with a tender smile. "You'll never have to choose between her and me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes and she nodded as though confirming something important to herself. Janet blinked rapidly, looking like she was holding back her own tears. "That's," she began, clearing her throat. "That shows a rare understanding of the situation, Mr. Carter." But Drew barely heard her. His attention was on Sarah, who cautiously stepped closer. "Will my mom be mad if I like you too?" she whispered, so low only Drew could hear. "No," he answered with certainty. "Moms want their kids to be loved and cared for. She'd be happy to know there's someone else to love you and Toby." Sarah nodded, absorbing his words. Then, in a gesture that caught Drew completely by surprise, she opened her arms and hugged him, the first hug initiated by her since their reunion. It was brief, but so complete in its meaning. It wasn't about erasing the past or replacing people. It was about creating space so that new connections could flourish while honoring what came before. It was about building bridges between what was lost and what could still be found. It was about a family forming, not through blood ties but through daily choices, constant presence, and love shown in both small and big ways. When Sarah finally let go, there was a different light in her eyes, no longer just caution or fear, but a flicker of hope. The rebuilding would be slow, sometimes painful, often uncertain, but it was happening brick by brick, day by day, and for Drew every little step felt like a miracle in itself. The official letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, unannounced. An envelope with the family court seal in the corner. Drew stared at it for long seconds before working up the nerve to open it. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Having evaluated all legal requirements and considering the best interest of the children in question, this court grants Mr. Andrew Carter the full and permanent adoption of minors, Sarah Elizabeth Lewis and Tobias James Lewis. The words blurred before his eyes. After 18 months of waiting, hearings, supervised visits, evaluations, moments of hope interspersed with despair, there it was, official, final, real. Sarah and Toby were legally his children. News about their biological mother had arrived 6 months earlier. After a long coma, she had passed away without ever regaining consciousness. Sarah cried for days, hugging the only photo she had of her mother. Drew was by her side the whole time, holding her small hand, wiping her tears, listening to stories about the woman who'd first loved her. The aunt who initially agreed to take them had eventually admitted she couldn't handle raising 2 children. Her own life was complicated, unstable. After meeting Drew and seeing the bond he had with the kids, she signed documents relinquishing any familial claim, paving the way for adoption. And now, it was finally done. Drew put the letter in a drawer and looked around the apartment, no, the house. They had moved into a real house in recent weeks with a backyard and spacious bedrooms upstairs. A place where Toby, now 2, could run around without bumping into furniture, and where Sarah could have her own space to create and dream. The physical move mirrored the transformation that had taken place in their lives. The old apartment, once so meticulously ordered and sterile, had gradually become a colorful, lively chaos. The new house fully embraced that chaos as part of its character. Sarah had decorated her room with framed drawings, some of the most meaningful from their journey together. The original drawing Drew found crumpled behind the couch, bearing the word family, was displayed in a place of honor above her bed. Others covered the walls of the hallway, living room, and kitchen, a riot of color and shape telling their story in pictures. Toby's toy cars spread across the living room floor, and his cloth books filled a low shelf within reach of his curious little hands. The fridge, beside Sarah's art, now sported magnet letters forming simple words Toby was beginning to recognize. The house was full of noise, full of life, stamped with the unmistakable, irreversible mark of its new inhabitants. Glancing at the clock, Drew realized it was time to pick the kids up from school and daycare. The routine that had once been so solitary was now a complex ballet of schedules, appointments, and small rituals giving shape to their days. It was exhausting, yes, but it made him feel more alive than ever. Parking in front of the elementary school, he saw Sarah waiting by the gate. When she spotted him, she smiled and ran over, backpack bouncing against her shoulders, a new drawing in her hand. No hesitation in her hug anymore, no caution in her affection. "Guess what happened today?" she asked as she buckled her seatbelt. "What?" "My teacher put my drawing on the classroom wall. She said it's the best one she's ever seen." Drew grinned, genuinely proud. "That's amazing, Sarah. You worked really hard on it." "It's a drawing of our house," she explained, showing him the artwork. "Look, I even drew the swing you promised to build." Drew laughed, catching the subtle reminder. "This weekend, I promise." At the daycare, Toby greeted them with his typical burst of energy. As soon as he saw Drew, he dropped the toy in his hand and ran with unsteady steps, yelling, "Daddy! Daddy!" with that pure joy only children can display. Drew scooped him up, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and cookies. Toby immediately started babbling in his own little language, mixing real words with made-up sounds, recounting stories only he fully understood. On the drive home, Drew watched his two children in the rearview mirror. Sarah was helping Toby with a picture book, pointing to animals and naming them patiently, as a big sister who took her role seriously. There was a confidence in her now, a security that grew each day. He decided to wait until dinner to share the news of the final adoption decree. For now, he'd savor this ordinary moment of extraordinary happiness. On Sunday, dawned under a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze wafting through the open windows. It was already past 8 when Drew finally came downstairs, having checked that both kids were still asleep. Saturday nights usually meant staying up later than usual, resulting in lazy Sunday mornings. Drew laid out the ingredients on the counter and began preparing pancake batter, a Sunday tradition they'd established over the past few months. As he whisked, he quietly hummed a tune he'd heard Sarah practicing for a school performance. That's not how the song goes. Drew turned to find Sarah standing in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, still in her pajamas, with Toby sleepily perched on her hip. The little boy was giggling about something, perhaps Drew's off-key humming. "Morning, sleepyhead," Drew said with a grin. "And no, I know I'm not much of a singer." Sarah rolled her eyes but smiled, setting Toby in his high chair. "Hungry," Toby declared, patting his small hands on the table. "Pancakes coming right up," Drew promised, pouring the first round of batter into the hot skillet. While the pancakes cooked, Sarah went to the fridge for juice. She passed by a shelf displaying various photos in colorful frames. She paused to straighten one, the three of them at the zoo, standing in front of the elephants, Toby in Drew's arms, Sarah with a melting ice cream cone, all of them beaming at the camera. Next to it, other pictures told the story of the last few months. Sarah holding Toby at his first birthday party with Drew, a snapshot of Drew reading a bedtime story with a child on each side, them building a snowman in winter, Sarah proudly showing off the first tooth she lost. The house was now filled with these little proofs of shared life, captured memories, preserved moments, a story being written day by day. "You know what the best day of the week is?" Sarah asked, taking a seat at the table. "Sunday?" Drew guessed, placing a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Yep, because we spend the whole day together." Drew felt that now familiar tightening in his chest, not of sadness or anxiety, but of a happiness so complete it almost hurt. After breakfast, with the sun already high, Drew suggested they head to the backyard. While Sarah helped Toby put on his shoes, Drew gathered some sheets and cushions. "Are we making a fort?" Sarah asked, eyes lighting up at the sight of the materials. "The best fort ever," Drew confirmed. Together, they transformed one corner of the yard into a makeshift refuge. Drew tied lines between two trees and a post from the clothesline, draping sheets to form a canopy. Sarah, with her natural artistic flair, took charge of decorating the space. "We need lights," she declared, running inside and returning with a box of colorful holiday lights they'd used for Christmas. The real magic happened when they were done. The sheet fort, glowing with colored lights, filled with soft cushions and a fuzzy blanket on the ground, looked straight out of a fairy tale. Toby was the first to crawl inside, giggling whenever the lights danced on his face. Sarah followed, arranging the cushions into a cozy little nest where both settled in. Drew lingered outside, smiling at the scene. Then Sarah's voice called to him from inside the fort. "You live here now too. You can't stay outside." Something about that sentence, her specific choice of words, touched Drew deeply. He ducked down and crawled in, lying beside them, with Toby nestled in between. For a while, they just rested in silence, gazing at the gently swaying sheet roof, listening to distant birdsong and the occasional laughter of neighboring kids. "Drew?" Sarah spoke quietly in that intimate space. "Yes? Are we really a family now?" The question hung in the air, laden with meaning. Drew turned to look at her and saw the seriousness in her eyes, the need for assurance, for certainty, in a world that had taught her far too soon that nothing was truly permanent. He smiled, reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "We are whatever we choose to be," he said softly, "and I choose to be yours, forever." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if searching for any flicker of doubt. Finding none, she scooted closer and hugged him, Toby babbling happily between them. In that moment, stretched out in a makeshift fort in the backyard of a house that finally felt like home, with two children who had come into his life by chance and now formed its center, Drew realized the perpetual restlessness he'd felt all his adult life, the constant need to move, to seek, to flee, was gone. For the first time, no part of him was running. No part of him wanted to be anywhere else. He was exactly where he belonged, finally home, finally whole. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward. There would still be many challenges ahead, plenty of tears, plenty of doubts. Real life didn't provide neatly wrapped, happily ever afters, but in that moment of imperfect perfection, Drew knew with absolute certainty it had all been worth it. Every hesitant step, every fear, every barrier overcome, each had been part of the path leading him here, to his home, to his family, to the place where his heart could finally rest.